funny because they don't do anything in the room, but they're for our lovely online audience. Big welcome to everyone. Welcome to Demos. Welcome to everyone who's joining us online as well. My name's Polly Curtis, and I am the Chief Executive of cross-party think tank Demos. And Demos exists to put people at the heart of policy making. So we're looking to design the methods, the ways, and the political case for changing the way that policy making is done. And we couldn't be more delighted to be joined by Audrey Tang today for this conversation as an international guru in how to do this. Has anyone ever called you a guru before? I bet they have. No, okay. We're going to start with the embarrassment here. So Audrey was a minister in the Taiwan government from 2016 to 2024, and most recently digital minister, and really changed the way that government is done there. She was a key contributor to Gov Zero, which is a decentralised civic tech movement that promotes transparency in government. I'm reading this to get this right. Information sharing, and helped to develop vTaiwan, the participatory democracy platform. There's about 24 different concepts in that sentence, and our role today is really to unpack this and show how differently Taiwan, under Audrey's leadership and convening capacity, has made this happen. And what we can learn about it here in the UK when we're at such a kind of pivotal political moment. Audrey is many other things as well. I read that you were a child prodigy, a software developer, the world's first non-binary minister, many brilliant things, and your new book, Plurality, which was co-authored with Weil, and a community of contributors, which is an important point, and I think a common theme we'll come back to through this conversation. It lays out a vision for how technologists, policymakers, business leaders and activists might come together to use technology to build a more collaborative, diverse and productive democratic world. So Audrey, a huge welcome. Thank you for joining us.
So happy to be here.
I'm just going to start with a how are you? How's your trip going? How's your evening?
Yeah, so it was great, and I switched time zone on average every 3 days. So I'm here in the UK for 3 days, and actually landed in a cultural situation. And so people were very excited on the street. And so I think a lot of the world tour of sorts that I flew out of Taiwan on May 20th, the day that my president and I, the entire cabinet, well, 80% of the cabinet graduated. And then I went to 6 European cities in 11 days, 6 Latin American cities in 11 days, and North America and here in the UK. But I would say that here in the UK I feel the most energy, the appetite for change, and also for like demonstrations in a way that's not protesting, not manufacturing counter power, but rather a way to show that maybe a new way of not just broadcasting, but broad listening can be done here.
So that's already one amazing idea which I want to come back to, the idea of shifting change making from protest to demonstration. We have loads of people in this room online who are huge fans of your work and followed it really closely, and I know they'll want to kind of get really into the detail of everything you've achieved. But we've also got some colleagues joining us who are new to this world as well. So I'm going to start with like a really open question to kind of introduce the concept of what you've achieved in Taiwan. So to introduce that concept of what you've been part of, can you describe what the digital democracy in Taiwan looks and feels like for citizens?
Sure. And for people who have been tracking my work, I will update with the latest alignment assembly work, which is not written in the books. And so just one very quick example. So a few days ago, the Taiwanese parliament passed a new law, the Anti-Fraud Act, that says many things, but including, for example, that social media companies should be liable for the potential deepfakes or celebrities or things like that. We already have penalties for non-consensual images, for election meddling and things like that. But this new law adds a new dimension that says any advertisement that shows someone, like celebrity or something, need to secure a public key signature, a digital signature from that person. And if it's not signed this way and somebody gets conned for $1 million, then the social media company will be liable for that $1 million. So it's internalizing the harm that it potentially causes. Now the interesting thing about this is that none of the words that I just described came from a professional policymaker. It all came from the Citizens Assembly that we run online. And so in the alignment assembly process, a few months ago, what we started is that we started with a Pol.is conversation. And Pol.is is this way of a pro-social social media. The experience is that you will get a kind of survey link, and that just asks you, what do you think about the world in 2040, and what's the role of AI in it, basically? What do you feel about 2040 with AI in it? And there is no reply button, so you see other people's feelings. You can say, yes, I resonate with that feeling. You can say, no, I don't resonate with that feeling. And there's a real-time visualization of clustering, so that you can see both, people who are very worried, like the boomers, people who are like very excited, the boomers or whatever, and then the bridge that connects them. For example, that short-term information integrity harms, online fraud, is something that both sides care deeply about. And so that sets the agenda. And based on that agenda, we then sent 200,000 SMS text messages to random numbers in Taiwan, coming from 111, the single number that people know of official communication come from, so they know it's from government. And again, a very simple question, like what's your idea to combat this potential harm? And then out of the people who responded, we used random stratified sampling to choose 450 people. 150 are practitioners, like journalists and media people, and 300 everyday people. And then those people we know are statistically representative of the Taiwanese population in terms of the place they live and gender and work, occupation, things like that. And then they meet online, and we pay them for their time to meet online for an entire day in 45 rooms, 10 people each. But there is no human facilitator. The rooms are like robot facilitated. And so the room will nudge people who were quiet to speak more. You can interrupt, but just for 5 seconds each. And the room continuously takes kind of group selfies that shows, based on the transcript, based on the analysis of language modeling, that what are the divisions and what are the bridges that are being made in that room. And when the room decides to move on, they can vote to move on to the next proposal, next idea. But there's also something we introduced that no human facilitators can easily do, which is to take pieces of ideas that reach consensus in one room and the other room and the other room and piece them together into a much more nuanced proposal, which is very difficult if you have 45 human facilitators to do that. But then it's read out in plenaries between the breakout sessions so that people can then reflect on those kind of puzzled pieces together ideas. And so many of these ideas turn out to be like very nuanced, very good working proposals. So you can think of it as a compression that is much better than your average executive summary that is not lossy it's not lost in compression. And so at the end of the day, then we have these post-deliberation 85% or more consensus proposals. Then we read out in a separate multi-stakeholder hearing to the usual suspects, to Meta, to Google, to OpenAI, to Microsoft, and so on. And we only asked whether it's technically possible, like whether it violates the laws of physics, something like that. And of course, it's going to cost them a lot, but the only thing they can say is that it's technically not possible. Of course, it's possible. So then after that, it's sent to the parliament. Now we have 3 parties, none of which have a majority. But this sort of law, like the Digital Signature Act, the Anti-Fraud Act, because they already know their constituents are broadly accepting, and in fact, these ideas came from their constituencies. So these laws usually get fast-tracked. And so it's now law, and it's not even 3 months since we held this consultation with multi-stakeholder.
Wow, that's fast.
So that's really, really fast. So I think it dispels two myths, right? One is that if you involve citizen assemblies, it delays the process. No, it makes the process faster. And also that you get sometimes more noise than signals, but with this generation of language modeling, of summarization tools and so on, actually you get, strictly speaking, better signal than the normal, polls and things like that.
And what's the role of the policymaker and the politician in that whole process? Is there a role?
Of course. So as the digital minister at the time, basically I hold the space. I have to pre-commit whatever the result of the alignment assembly is. I will read it to the relevant stakeholders. And that's the key, right? In 2015, we already said, the UX situation, we're not there to debate about abstract things like extractive economy versus sharing economy, whatever. We're just sharing the facts around UberX in Taiwan and asking people's feelings. But we promise that those common bridge-making feelings will be read out to the taxi association, to the co-ops, to Uber itself, and so on. And if they do not show up on the table, well, they're lost because we're going to make a law based on this agenda. So this idea of crowdsourced agenda setting requires a pre-commitment from policymakers. And at the end of the day, of course, it's still sent to the parliament. So how it reconciles with the rest of the legal system, that is still the role for MP to do. So in terms of design thinking, this is a kind of better first diamond. It is a better way to discover the common worries, hopes, and fears. It is a slightly better way to define these common feelings into ideas. But the delivery, the development and the delivery, that is still squarely in the MPs and in policymakers.
And what portion of the laws are now made in this way in Taiwan, and how would you choose which ones to open up to the public in this way?
Yeah, the thing is, Pol.is is open source public interest technology. Monopoly on the use of this technology. So a journalist, for example, or anyone who really is an organizer can start such a process. And then they can later on say, oh, look, here's your constituency and here's the consensus. And maybe you would like to read it out on city councils and so on. So I would say that, first of all, the vTaiwan process, which we prototyped before I went into the cabinet in 2016, that alone has, I think, 24 or so laws and regulations passed this way. But then after I became the digital minister, we trained within the government what we call participation officers. So in all 30 ministries, there are teams of people in charge of leading this way of engagement with people. And that altogether co-created more than 100, you can call them collaborative meetings, that sometimes resulted in law change or regulation change, but sometimes it resulted just in norm change. For example, there's a lot of citizen initiatives that set the tone for the collaborative meetings, like 5,000 signatures online can demand a response from the participation office and their ministers. And so they're very young people that basically said, people in high schools should go to school not in 7:30 a.m., but rather 8:45 a.m., because research showed that if you sleep for 1 hour more, it actually improves retention or something like that. It was very popular among students. So, because we don't limit the age in which you can propose such things. And so it really did result in actionable change. And so I would say through the collaborative meetings, 100 of those, maybe 50 of them resulted in regulatory or policy change. The other 50 resulted in some sort of norm change, or people understood that it is maybe not the state's role to do, for example, fact-checking the journalists. That's not the state's role. But it did create an ecosystem where the high schoolers can then collaboratively contribute into fact-checking without the state setting up a disinformation oversight board or things like that.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a big question next, which is why? Like, what's the purpose of all of this? But I just want to quickly come to the audience because we've just introduced a lot of different concepts. Does anyone have any clarifying questions that they want to ask? Do you want to introduce yourself? It's nice to know who's here.
Yeah, and do we pass the mic?
Oh, yes, we do. Sorry. Thank you for being better at this than me.
Hi, my name is Iman, and it's really, really great to meet you. I have a question about so I guess on the touch point of the role of politicians and policymakers, but if you're taking questions and you are proposing, I guess, the consensus, perhaps this is a simplified way of going about it, but I would imagine that's kind of common ground, or it's sort of a compromised solution that takes into account people who feel very strongly one way or another, and this is a way forward. To what end is there kind of another look at whether, there is something missed from a particular perspective that is, I guess, in some sense normalized or harmonized with other perspectives and views in aggregate?
Yeah, that's a great question.
So the question was, it's kind of like, even when you've done that whole process, how do you know your blind spots? Is that the question? Yeah.
And also, like, what's the role of the minority, of the very different views from other people that may get lost in the majority count, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. The important thing about Pol.is is that it's clone-proof, in the sense that if you mobilize 5,000 people, 50,000 people, vote exactly the same way in the Pol.is system, they actually do not increase the area of the cluster. And in a sense, they get condensed into one single point. It doesn't count, basically. What's measured is the plurality or the collaboration across diversity among positions. So if you have, like in the Uber case, initially we have 4 very different clusters. We have the taxi union people, the professional Uber driver people, the more pro Ministry of Transportation people, for a lack of better term, and also the rural people who really care about Uber's lack of coverage in the rural areas and so on. And so the rural people, if you just count in terms of numbers of people, are like a fraction of the other islands. But because their ideas are so different from the others, they show up in actually a larger area in the Pol.is visualization. And so the idea is that we only uplift the statements that enjoy a bridging bonus. So if you can build bridges within your cluster, that's fine. But in order to get to the very top, you have to bridge into that rural area. You have to propose ideas such as not undercutting existing meters and only do surge pricing, or to have the local co-ops enjoy the same app-based dispatch, or for the state to invest in the public infrastructure that would enable interoperable taxi calling, or things like that, right? Broadband as a human right and things like that. And so the idea is if we only give out bridging bonuses instead of just counting by head count, then it changes the game. People do not then have the incentive to mobilize into simple voting, and not for lack of trying. I mean, after the Uber case, we did Airbnb, and Airbnb sent an email to all their members in Taiwan saying, go to Pol.is and support our party line, which would otherwise have worked if it's a normal poll. But because it's a wiki survey in which people are encouraged to share their own feelings, and so it turns out less than 1/3 of Airbnb members agree with the Airbnb party line. Most people have their own feelings to share. And in higher dimensions, those people's ideas become new clusters that you now have to bridge across. So I think that's the magical thing about Pol.is. It's not hiding the divisions in the society. It's not hiding the vocal minority. Rather, it is giving full dignity, full voice to those divisions. But then, because we only read out those bridging bonuses statements, it encourages people to think beyond those divides. So I wouldn't call them consensus. I would just call them things we can live with, or something like that, which is much lighter and much easier to reach than consensus.
Right. So I'm keen to ask my why question,
Yes.
and what was the purpose of this. But just on Pol.is, can Flynn and Sophia put their hands up, who are our resident Sophia, resident friends of Demos who know Pol.is well, and so if you want to talk to them afterwards, please do catch them to learn more about Pol.is. But so this whole change in how you made these policies, why? What was the impetus for it?
Yeah, in 2014, the administration at the time was enjoying 9% approval rate from the society. So anything that the administration, the Ma Ying-jeou administration at the time says, the citizen automatically distrust.
Does that sound familiar? To anyone? Yeah.
I think that the rate amount here is around 20%, so you're like twice better than what we were at 10 years ago. And so at 9%, the distrust was so high, such that in March in that year, people really distrusted the way that Parliament was fast-tracking a trade service deal with Beijing, and because there's kind of no transparency at all of how it was going to be handled. And so the students occupied the Parliament non-violently for 3 weeks, and with 500,000 people on the street, with many more online, we learned from all the occupiers that occurred before us. So we understood this live streaming, this way of understanding that if police do come, we can counter-surround the police, and if the police and the traditional media paints us as violent people, the only way to counter that is just live streaming in each and every corner to show that we're thoroughly nonviolent and so on. And so it really worked. And so throughout the 3 weeks, we work with professional facilitators to basically steer people's energy, both online and in person, to whichever corner you care the most about. For example, if you care about cybersecurity, then you may join the corner that talks about Huawei and ZTE in our then new 4G infrastructure, right? But if you care about labor rights, if you care about environmental, if you care about children and things like that, then you all have different civil society organizations chairing such facilitations. And again, every day there's a readout of the kind of provisional common understanding that have been reached the previous day. And so unlike most other occupies, it converged over time rather than diverged over time. And at the end of the 3 weeks, the head of the parliament, Speaker Wang Jinping, basically said, it sounds very coherent, and so let's do that, right? So it is one of the very rare Occupy that did reach the goal. Now to your why question, basically at the end of 2014, all the mayoral candidates that run with an open government, with a crowdsourcing platform, won the mayorship, sometimes to a surprise to even them. They didn't prepare an inauguration speech or something like that. And all the mayors that, was stuck in the top-down, working for you but not with you way of thinking did not get mayorship. And so at the end of 2014, the cabinet basically systemically said, okay, we need now to find reverse mentors, people younger than 35, well-versed in this new sort of policy making to mentor us in the art of broad listening, essentially. So I was then recruited, I was 33 at the time, as a reverse mentor to one of the cabinet ministers who worked with me to do the vTaiwan process on UberX, Airbnb, crowdfunding, all that. And meanwhile, I'm also working on the curriculum committee. And so after 2 years, I turned 35. I'm too old to be a young advisor, to be a reverse mentor. So they promoted me. Yeah, they promoted me to a full minister so that I have to have my own reverse mentor.
Yeah. An amazing story. And actually, there are some really interesting parallels with where we are here now in this country, with a profound kind of loss of trust in the political system and a kind of very odd mandate for a new government, kind of a big majority in the House, but actually quite shaky majorities constituency by constituency. And just as a vignette, just after the election, a couple of new MPs messaged me saying, how do you do participation? Like, how can we do this? Because we have such divided communities. How do we bring people together in this way? So I hadn't quite realised that heritage story, and it feels really relevant to where we are now. One of the things that really strikes me about it is it's like I keep on wanting to describe you as a leader of this, but it's a non-hierarchical way of working.
Just
how
a random
does that
facilitator,
work? but that's quite hard for people kind of versed in our political system, which is incredibly hierarchical, and for some good reasons as well, around accountability and representation as well as participation, to get our heads round how non-hierarchical can you get? What does that mean for you as digital minister in Taiwan?
Yeah, so I worked as a digital minister without portfolio for 6 years before we have the Ministry of Digital Affairs. So during the first 6 years, I only had an office, which we call the Public Digital Innovation Space, or PDIS. We drew a lot of lessons from Policy Lab's work, from the GDS work, from Nesta's work, from BIT's work, all those very excellent work. And in fact, we share staff also. And so there are people in the Taiwanese public service that want to be seconded to the cabinet office for a while, usually for half a year or so. And so we made a policy of only seconding one person from each ministry at a time. So while at some time the Ministry of Education have people lined up, right, we only have one Ministry of Education secondment to my office. And the rest form the team, what we call participation officers. So in each of those 30 ministries, there's at least one person, but usually a team in charge of engaging the public. And so the core is the PDIS, or the hub is the PDIS, and the network is the participation officer network. And so that is great, because then as a public servant, although you still have your usual hierarchy, you also have an additional horizontal family to kind of trust fall into when it's your turn to deal with these challenges in civic participation and pre-bunking, in defending against polarization attacks. We don't do debunk. We see what's trending and we pre-bunk it before the polarization hits the people, and so on. And so that became very important during the pandemic. That formed kind of our real-time pandemic response force. And Taiwan went for 3 years without any day of citywide lockdown, and one of the best responses, I would say, during the first couple of years. And so that is by and large because we were able to respond to the speed of the mutation of the virus thanks to this network of participation officers that offers real-time insights and support. But throughout this, they basically are still within the ministry. And when they got back to their ministry, usually because they have tapped into a cabinet level, network, they get a much better career choices once they get back to the ministry. And so the idea, very simply put, is that it's a fractal-like structure. In the cabinet office, there's the PDIS, and then within larger ministry like health and welfare, then each agency, each director general, and so on, would have their own agency-level participation officers. So at the end of the day, for any topic, you can tap into people who have done some sort of citizens' assembly or some sort of participatory budgeting into your network to ask, okay, how do I do this thing?
Fascinating. What's the impact been? So you've talked about specific policy impacts, but overall, how has it changed the political culture in Taiwan?
Yeah, so Dr. Tsai Ing-wen and the cabinet graduated May 20th with, I think, close to 70%, more than 60% for sure, approval rate. So that's much higher than 9%.
Go on, good question, John.
And much higher than 20% when we start institutionalizing all this in 2018, right? So in a very short span of just 6 years, it more than tripled the trust. So to give no trust is to get no trust. And when you radically trust citizens, some citizens do trust back. This is what we see. And also, we like to say that the Taiwanese students, the 15-year-olds, are like top 3 or top 5 in OECD PISA or whatever. And also we happen to be the happiest place in Asia in those indexes. But to me, the most important index is actually the ICCS index that measures the the civics capability of 15-year-olds. So it's like OECD PISA, but measures how much a 15-year-old cares about the societal issues, how much agency they feel about the actual change they can do with the government and so on. And Taiwan is consistently like top one in the ICCS, all the different metrics in 2022. And so I think that made sure that all the three parties compete on the race to the top, like who can do open government partnership better, who can do accountability and transparency better. And you do not see the politicians like in 2014 who kind of writes off this entire working with the people because they simply go extinct. And the surviving parties are all racing to the top when it comes to citizen participation.
And just to try and get a bit scientific about it, that tripling in trust ratings, how much of that can you put down to the digital democratic methods that were introduced? What were the other factors in there? I'm trying to get a kind of sense of how, like, what
I
were the
mean,
other...
it's hard to
really
do causation analysis, and there's some correlation for sure. There's studies on that. A lot of it can also be attributed to my other work, which is the new curriculum, that really changed the way that we teach in schools. The idea is that instead of literacy, which is about consuming standardized answers and maybe with some critical thinking, but very individual basis to competence. So the younger generation is now actively encouraged to not just set citizens' initiatives, agenda, and so on, but also just go through the journalistic process of finding different sources, of contributing to collaborative fact-checking, of making sure that pre-bunking works in their family, of measuring air quality and contributing to distributed ledger technologies and all that, right? So I think it's not one single thing that we can point to that says, oh, this is digital democracy. Rather, this is about using technologies to make sure that we have a higher bandwidth when it comes to democratic input, that people can contribute more so than they can a single vote. And also a lower latency, that people can contribute every weekend if they want, especially on citizens' initiatives, like the younger people who really want to ban plastic straws from bubble tea takeouts, right? So they would like really put a lot of time into it and build solidarity with the 60 years or 70-year-olds, this intergenerational alliance around protecting sea turtles and all that. So basically the idea is that the mobilization that is in the civil society, we do not squander them in the polarized antisocial corners of social media. We build such pro-social corners, the public square that is part of participation in public infrastructure, so that even if just one fraction of energy go here, people feel much more seen and heard, and the agency is much higher. So I would say that it's this general attitude that now a new generation of Taiwanese people just grow up thinking that it's normal for people to behave this way, for politics to behave this way, and a new generation of public servants that simply think, okay, yeah, it's just, you know, running a poll, a focus group. This is nothing special. We just run a process.
What were the kind of cultural barriers you came at in getting this change adopted across government and getting the endorsement? What were the kind of blockers you came up against, and how did you shift the culture around this trust-first approach?
Yeah, I would say that by far the most conflict we have is with people who would like to see this quicker, who would like to see this sooner, who would like to institutionalize all of this in terms of law instead of just a bunch of good, better practices or presidential hackathons or practices like the training wheels of sorts. So before the pandemic, the most criticism I got was from actually the civil society people who are basically very anxious that if Audrey Tang is gone, then none of this will remain because all of this is regulatory level and none of this is law level stuff. And so I think a lot of what we have done during the pandemic is to show that the relationship muscles, those smaller practice runs that we have done during the non-pandemic times, turn out to be like essential critical infrastructure of societal resilience during the pandemic. That is what allowed us to build rapid response to the infodemic. That's what allowed us to develop better contact tracing method that does not invade privacy, so on and so forth. And so once those happens, then people do not become so anxious anymore, because they then see that the people who work closest with me then form a new ministry, the Ministry of Digital Affairs. And a lot of the work that we have done is now infrastructure, because we're in the transportation committee in the parliament. So they become like train stations, like airports and things like that. And so digital participation infrastructure become a matter of digital public infrastructure. And so I think that made them very happy. And so now I'm touring the world, but my deputy minister, my vice minister, the two director generals, head of cybersecurity, they all remain. It's the same team. And so there's a lot of stability in the career public service that have this feeling like, yeah, even without Audrey Tang, we can continue this work.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we're doing at Demos is trying to convince the new government of new ways of working and trying to kind of demonstrate to them the benefits, particularly in that context of low trust that we're in at the moment, and the potential that you lay out so beautifully. And there is appetite, but there is also resistance as well. And I'm interested to learn from you. Did you face resistance in the other way as well, of people saying, I don't want to share my power differently, I don't trust people to make decisions? Did you experience any of that?
Well, there are, of course, citizens' initiatives that met with a lot of resistance from even the participation officer themselves. For example, there was a case where 1,000 people did this an initiative that says, let's dial our clock to change our time zone to +9, the same as Japan, instead of +8. And there's another 8,000 people that started a counter initiative that says, let's stay in +8. Now, if we're building a compromise position, that would mean that we dial the clock 30 minutes into the future, which will make exactly 0 person happy. And so, of course, we don't do that. And so I think when these kind of things happen, when people fear that it's a massive waste of time, you've got like 16,000 people waiting on this time zone change issue. And why are we even spending a single minute in talking about something that's obviously not happening, right? And so this is when really nonviolent communication and dynamic facilitation come to play, because then you want to ask the underlying feelings. It's not just this idea of changing time zone to +9. Like, why do they feel so urgent that we change our time zone? And so we did 2 things. First, we invited both sides to the collaboration meeting. Instead of 2 collaboration meetings, we invited both. And then we asked those feeling questions beforehand. And so it turns out that people who want to change the time zone just feel that they have to make people who fly in from Beijing or from Shanghai or from other cities in the PRC to force them to change the clock, to show that Taiwan is a unique place. So that was the underlying reason. There is an underlying urgency. And the people who want to stick in +8 actually did so purely on economic perspective, because they know it will cost a lot to change the time zone. And so we calculated exactly how many $1 million it will cost to change our time zones. We work with the think tanks, with the energy people, the stock exchange people, the tourism people, and so on, to put a dollar figure on the time zone change. And then our collaboration meeting asks not about time zone, but rather, if we're ready to spend this much money to make Taiwan seen as unique in the world, is there a better way to do that, right? Can we spend it instead, on making the world know more that bubble tea comes from Taiwan? Can we spend it so that people know that we're the first place in Asia to legalize marriage equality and the journey getting there? Can we bring more like RightsCon or other human rights related conferences to Taiwan and sponsor them? Can we sponsor people who have contributed to open source, to Creative Commons, to the internet for 8 years and give them Taiwanese residency and healthcare and sponsor their first trip to Taiwan, which, by the way, is law now. And so all these doesn't cost as much, not even a fraction of the time zone change. And so even people who sign up for the time zone change eventually agree that these sounds like better ideas. Why don't we just go ahead and implement those? And so not afraid of conflict, to confront this conflict and see them as ways to co-create. Like before, we see fire on the ground and we put them out. We say it's a disaster, but now we drill because we know there's energy underneath, right? So Taiwan is a place with a lot of conflicts like this. But then if you have good facilitation skills, if you have participation officers across ministries, then you see each and every of those conflicts as invitations to co-create.
Incredible way of reframing it. I have to say, one of the joys of sitting up here with you is actually looking at how gripped this audience is, concentrating so hard. And I can imagine there are lots of questions. So I'm going to open it up to questions now, or thoughts if you want to contribute a thought. But I would ask you to keep it quite short so that we can get around as many people as possible. If the mic goes to you, and then you, and then you, that would be brilliant.
Thanks. Just to say, phenomenal.
Introduce yourself,
Okay,
please.
Andrea Westall, long background in policy, so absolutely interested in this, and also a senior associate at the Cambridge Sustainability Leadership Group. Also useful for this, I think. From what you said, because I've done a lot of mediation, and going to that limit of conflict, the way that you're talking about what you're doing, it feels like it could also be really useful in some extreme conflict situations as well. So it'd be interesting to hear where that's been used to really kind of break through what has been quite difficult before. And the other one is that a lot of times things like citizens' assemblies are used for that top level policy. And when it comes to implementation, sometimes that implementation needs to be differentiated and contextual. And I'm just trying to see if you've got examples of where it's got to that level rather than staying at the top level of that agreement for the change.
That's a great question.
Not take it in threes because
Sorry.
I think
That was
let's
a bit
take the
long.
subject,
Apologies.
But then we'll go back. So
Sure.
do you want to take that question first?
Yeah. So to your second question, the first collaborative meeting that actually broke through was a simple petition that says that income tax filing experience is explosively hostile. And so it's not a particularly constructive petition, but it is a frustration. And because that software was written in Java technology, and the idea was when the Java applet was deprecated by Sun/Oracle systems. And so people had a lot of frustration. If they're using Mac, if they're using Linux, they can't really file their income tax properly without going through a lot of hoops. And some of them actually called the tax bureau, and they say, just get a Windows computer, which adds fuel to the fire, right? If I want to get a Windows, I won't buy a Mac. And so basically, it became kind of very explosive. And so the way we did that collaborative meeting was really start drawing mock-ups, just thinking like if we can ignore all the technical difficulties and challenges, what is the ideal journey of filing an income tax? And so just, forget about the fact that we don't have a very good digital signature law. Forget about the fact that we don't have a very good way to automatically calculate the rebate or things like that, right? So ideally, if all of these have technical solutions, what is the shortest possible income tax filing experience? And people get really creative. And so people who joined the petition became, the person who started the petition turns out to be a experienced designer, service designer. And so he carries the dual hat of being the instigator of this movement, but also a person who can really draw this entire journey from discovery to the initial definition. And then what we did was that we brought the implementers, the product managers, and so on, who also filed in their income taxes, right? So for the first time, people discovered that they have a language in common. And then the idea that could really work within the same fiscal year, we just uplifted that into digital infrastructure for that fiscal year. So already for people using mobile or Mac, the experience gets massively better the next year. And then for people who, use non-traditional operating systems and things like that, who don't have a card reader and things like that, it got better the next year. So for the next 3-4 years, it just gets consistently better. And in every case, we can point to the original collaborative meeting and say that although we could not deliver everything in a single year, we did promise that within 4 years, it will get to that ideal point. So I think that really builds trust, because people are not asking that you deliver a strong technical infrastructure that solves everything within 1 year. That's not possible. But if you say 4 years later, you will have that, and then deliver that. That builds an enormous amount of trust, both within and also outside of the government. Now, for a completely different case, which is a very high-tension case, which is marriage equality. So in Taiwan, we've had a constitutional court ruling. We had 2 referenda, actually 4 referenda, and 2 that passed. And it's an extremely explosive topic in Taiwan. And the joint platform that we set up after I became digital minister, the participation officers monitored. We did not talk about marriage equality per se, because that is too abstract a topic to talk about. We talk about a lot of very simple matters related to marriage equality, but adjacent to it. And for example, people observed that in Taiwan, for heterosexual couples, the marriage is between 2 families. So they form kinship relationship between families. But that is a problem, because for people of the Confucian tradition, allowing same-sex marriage to marry 2 families will necessitate a creation of 16 different words for aunts and uncles and things like that. And so it's a big cultural disruption, and they won't have that. And so there's this design that we learned from Iceland, from Better Reykjavik, that for issues like this, if on the Citizens Initiative platform, you have 2 columns, one for pro and one for contra, but you do not have a reply button, and you cannot reply across aisles. You only have upvote and downvote. Then the cream of the crop that floats to the top are often complementary to each other. And so then we harvested some of the really good insights that says, if 2 same-sex people wed, if they wed as individual, they wed, but their families don't marry, because these are 2 different words in Mandarin. If they wed, 结婚, but their families don't marry, they don't 结姻, then it solves the kinship problem, and also it makes it a superior form of marriage, because then you don't have the same duty of care for your extended family and things like that. And so, in a sense, it's a better form of marriage, right? And so then it changes the dialogue, and it creates, obviously, new divisions among people who were previously in the same camp. But it also built bridges across people who were previously in different camps. And so it turned conflict orthogonal. And if you can keep this kind of ideas that are kind of out of the box thinking that turns the conflict orthogonal, then you do not reinforce existing societal divisions. And that is the key to depolarization. It is not that people meet in the middle and kumbaya and all that. It is creating unlikely alliances out of people who were previously very widely divided. And so by systemically doing that with the joint platform and so on, we finally legalized marriage equality by basically saying that, right? And so by passing a new law that hyperlinks to all parts of civil code other than the kinship section. And so that's how we legalized marriage equality. And that was very high tension. And that was resolved partly because of this way of collaborative diversity.
Amazing, thank you. Do you want to?
Yeah, hi. My name's Matu, and I head up a wealth fund for a local authority here in London. And we're trying to prove that citizen decision-making can deliver effective returns and also societal benefit for our local authority. And one of the things we're really deeply thinking through right now is how to involve experts, investment professionals, sector professionals into the process without losing trust and knowing that a lot of our financial institutions don't have probably less trust than the democratic institutions. Do you have any examples of how you've involved that expertise into that decision-making process, and or just any advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the Pol.is conversations, we do not separate the experts from the everyday people. When we send random SMS, it's literally to random numbers. We don't have another pool of experts to send to. On the other hand, some people in the returning survey, they identify as experts, or they identify as practitioners, or the relevant public, and so on. And so we do flag that, and we do make sure that there's a kind of healthy mix and also a healthy separation. So there are rooms in which there's only practitioners, 10 of which are all practitioners. And there are also rooms that are a healthy mix of everyday people and experts and practitioners. And the thing with the language model mediated automated assembly is that it can synthesize the ideas from this lay person's groups and the experts groups in a way that makes sense for both sides. Because in a mixture, then you're kind of forcing the experts to speak in a layperson's language. But in the expert group, you're more likely to get like almost legal language description, right, to the issue. So you need both. And then using newer technologies like Talk to the City and so on, you can do a language model synthesis that does a translation between those two languages, because all the incoming information are in the raw data. So you're not forcing the model to hallucinate. They only do what they do best, which is to model language. They're language models. And so because of that, then you get a very nuanced executive summary that can be read both ways. It can be translated to everyday language by pointing out the part that it resonated with the everyday people written, but it can also be translated into an executive summary language for the experts. And so I think the more you practice this kind of summarization and kind of transcultural translation, the better the experts get when they need to present their readouts in a way that makes sense to everyday people. And that is what we need, is a horde of people who are versed in their expert knowledge, but they're not afraid of talking in everyday person's terms when it comes to multi-stakeholder consultation, especially in so-called wicked problems. You need to involve like 5 different disciplines. And so everyone is a lay person in the other 4 disciplines anyway, right? And so you especially need that sort of transcultural translation layer to this. Now, of course, the use of language model in this is very new. It's like new as of last year, right? So I'm not saying that there is a kind of solutionism thing to this, but I think this is a very worthy direction to start experimenting toward.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Audrey. What music is popular in Taiwan, and can you tell us a bit more about Justin XX?
Sure. Justin XX is a fashion brand, and it designs this from the National Palace Museum, one of the arts in the National Palace Museum that I happen to like. I think they also designed the Olympics outfit of Taiwan's Olympics team. Anyway, and it's not a music brand. So Taiwan has a very thriving like pop music scene, of course, but there's also like we have 20 national languages, 16 of which indigenous, and the 16 languages are actually 42 languages. It's just 16 language groups. Anyway, and so there's a very thriving on the eastern side, this Polynesian, Austronesian tradition of indigenous music, and a lot of the kind of recent remixes is from the like rap or the newer generations of people speaking in their indigenous languages and also uplifting it to the popular consciousness. So if you're interested in music, I would really encourage to check it out.
Can you play some for us? No?
I do not have that capacity here.
Quickly, are there any questions online?
Brilliant. Yeah, so we've had quite a few contributions online, so I'll just kind of summarize a few for you. Oh, yep, okay. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so we've got some people kind of asking. Sorry, this is slightly challenging to manage. Okay. Yeah, we have some kind of interesting questions. Essentially, there's one kind of about the role of direct action, saying when you try to capture kind of politicians' attention, did you find kind of big moves like the Parliament sit-in were more effective, or kind of is it the constant knocking on the door and the kind of day-to-day smaller kind of actions that allow you to engage people? We also saw kind of, a lot of kind of interesting comments. One about this kind of more of a comment about a kind of question of evolution versus revolution, and this idea of how do you have kind of major systems change. And I think what you've kind of talked about is the pace of change being quite slow.
Gradual change.
Yeah, and I think, some interesting stuff about kind of has the population of Taiwan more broadly been kind of receptive to some of these uptake of digital tools, and thinking a little bit as well about what are the kind of barriers to adoption you've encountered. Is that something that's been part of the process, thinking about digital exclusion and how do you navigate that?
Definitely. Yeah. Very good question. Fantastic questions.
Direct action, evolution versus revolution, population appetite, and some of the barriers.
Digital divide,
Yeah.
yes. So I find direct action the most useful when you can bring demos, right? The demonstrations, like better ways to do things. So if the direct action is about showing a new way of facilitation, a new way of running assemblies, the direct action that occupied the parliament actually used the parliament as a way to do facilitative policymaking and so on, then that tends to be very convincing because people have this shared peak experience. It's like once Wikipedia happens, you can't unsee the fact that there is a possibility to crowdsource something like Encyclopedia Britannica. The old "this can't work" argument ceased to work once there is a direct action and shared peak experience. On the other hand, if there's no corresponding demonstration, but just protest, just a counter power, then I would argue that maybe this more gradual change is much easier to convince people because then it's an invitation that says, okay, the system's broken, we see the structure is injustice, but I have no idea yet what is the better demonstration, what is the alternative. So my protest is kind of more gradual in the sense of I just want to keep highlighting the issue with the current structure, and I have this invitation to anyone and everyone who can think of better ways to do things. And that is the core of Gov Zero or G0V. It is about finding something the government isn't doing well at something that Gov.tw, and then working together until somebody figure out how to do that function better and start publishing it as something that G0V.tw. So changing O to a 0 gets you into the shadow government. And that is especially true for public servants because like here in the UK, the Taiwanese public service is anonymous, right? They're basically prevented from speaking directly or partaking in direct action with civil society groups. But sometimes they actually do know how things could have been better had there been political will or budget. And so a lot of the Gov Zero hackathons have this online participation from pseudonymous career public service. So much so that we organized this idea called presidential hackathon so that you can pseudonymously propose an idea. And we say that each team, 200 teams or so every year, must consist of one civil society, one private sector, and one public sector. But the public sector can be pseudonymous. And we use like quadratic voting, new ways of democracy to suss out the synergies and so on. And at the end of the day, when the 5 teams every year win the trophy of the presidential hackathon, the trophy is a microprojector. When you turn it on, it projects the president giving you the trophy. So it's very meta. It describes itself. And sometimes only when they receive the trophy do the public servant part of the team say, actually, that was my idea all along. But before, I was just working with the civil society, right? And so to create safe spaces for them to face this uncertainty, to uplift what has worked in a single department, in a single municipality, in a single district, until such a day where they win the presidential hackathon and therefore got a promise from the president that it will become digital infrastructure in the next fiscal year. That's their highlight moment, right? So I think structurally we need to create create such safe spaces for the career public service to face uncertainty in order to co-create better solutions. And in that sense, it's not even solutions, it's co-creations with the people, not for the people. So the entire vocabulary of solution delivery really doesn't work here, right? So the point, I think, is that it's neither direct action nor protest. It is a safe space to kind of get both energies into the same place and to start prototyping and to start building useful alternatives. And at the end, but even the failures, even the lessons learned become part of the public common knowledge so that people can learn from it. So I think revolutions are important in the sense that if not for the Occupy, if not for the shared peak experience, there will be no peak experience to refer to. But once that happened, then you do not need to occupy your parliament. You can just point to Taiwan or something like that and say something like that could have happened, but we don't need that to happen here. We can just use the fruits that were born out of that particular research experiment or revolution. So I think it's, strictly speaking, additive revolutions to evolutions to maybe revolutions somewhere else to evolutions.
And the last one was on population appetite.
Oh, yeah.
Is there an appetite?
Yeah. I think in Taiwan, what we have really is broadband as human right, as a very fundamental principle. So no matter whether you're in the most remote of the islands where only satellites can reach, or whether you're on top of Yushan 4,000 meters high, you still are guaranteed to have unlimited data that's bidirectional. So it's not broadcasting, it's also broad listening for like 14 euros per month or something like that. And so I think this is the absolute basic. You cannot ignore that bit, because otherwise you're systemically excluding people in rural places or in high mountains out from the digital democracy. And on top of that is this education system that I mentioned, the curriculum that says even before you turn 18, you're active citizens. You're not just a consuming party to the literacy classes. You're the competent initiator. So with these two, the competence education and universal access, universal broadband, then I think the appetite is very large, because for people who are 15 years old or 16 years old, they really want to set an agenda for the country. When they become like reverse mentors to cabinet members or even to the night markets around the SMEs, we have this transformation ambassadors where young people just mentor the existing SMEs in the arts of digital transformation and so on. They rise up to the occasion, and that brings their entire family with it. And that appetite, the same, collaborative fact-checking, if it is the culture minister telling you to do that, you won't do that. But if it's your grandchildren, you will do that, right? So that also helps to whet the appetite, and that's how we help the helpers as well.
Fantastic. Where's the mic from?
Here it is. I'm going to start over here and then work our way over to John. My colleague here, if that's right. For your question.
Hi, Tim Hughes from the Open Government Partnership. I wanted to ask you about the interplay between democracy and technology. It feels as though over the past decade, possibly since you started out, we've kind of moved from a time of optimism where technology was kind of a force for good in democracy to now much more of a sense of a time of pessimism with the role of deepfakes and AI and disinformation. I want to know kind of whether you're positive about the future of technology and democracy, and kind of how do you think we can kind of strike that balance of ensuring that technology is used for kind of a positive force for democracy and we kind of limit the harms of it?
Yeah. I think we're so optimistic about democracy itself being a social technology that people can contribute and improve in Taiwan, because we've never ceded the public square to the private sector. And so the Gov Zero meetings every 2 months for the past 12 years now takes place in the National Academy, which is a credibly neutral space that is above all ministers. The open source Reddit equivalent in Taiwan, PTT, still runs as part of the National Taiwan University student club, and again 2 arms length, right, from the Minister of Education. And because it's open source, people can actually build different apps, different ways to curate that information. And because it's interoperable, it also makes the publishing layer very separate from the curation layer. So you can have a lot of creativity on the curation layer. But if you post on, say, TikTok, these two layers are completely siloed in. You can post on TikTok, but you cannot view it in anywhere else. And so everything is trapped into this addiction fueling algorithm, which contributes to the techlash, right? And so I think a lot of the core analysis that we did in Taiwan was that really the Ministry of Digital Affairs, being part of the Transportation Committee, signifies that these fundamental protocols needs to be thought as like interoperable train station tracks, or that you won't have each airline building their own airports, right? You won't have ATMs that only work with one single bank card, in which case, no new banks will enter the market because all the good place for ATM would have been taken. These core interoperability should extend beyond Type C, which is a very good thing, by the way, but also like all the way up to all the different portions of stack of privacy preserving identity, like decentralized identity stuff, to secure contextually integral but group messaging that's across the different platforms, to different ways to publish content, but also very different ways to consume and curate those content and so on. And so if this entire stack is thought of as infrastructure, then the information superhighway, so to speak, actually costs only a fraction if you compare it to actual highway budget. And that's why we went to the Transportation Committee, by the way, because then our budget all look very small next to actual highways and much more environmental friendly. Also, yeah, even the satellite receivers, they're so much more environmentally friendly and cheap compared to, actual roads into those forests and so on. Anyway, so the idea to think of these as essential infrastructure investment, I think is one of the more powerful things that the government can do. And the more you then define it as participation and public infrastructure, the more the public square is back to the public. And then I think the curational layer has a ton of potential to be also sponsored, like in Taiwan. A lot of the best social investments, the impact investment community, are funded by spiritual communities, by the Tzu Chi Buddhism community, by the Christianity. I'm a Taoist, but in Taiwan there's like 4 different religions, none of which have a majority. We're the second most religious diverse, and each of them would like to curate in some way the public square that is for the public good instead of for short attention span addiction, which is probably not helping your neighbors in any of those religions. And so that also adds a new kind of curation funding layer to the game. So it's not just the Ministry of Culture.
We've got 7 minutes left, and I can see so many hands. Can the mic go to the lady in the middle and then the 2 gentlemen on the left?
Hi, Audrey. Louise Crow from My Society. I'm really struck by the way that in the vTaiwan process you ask people how they feel and not what they think. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about how you came to that approach and what difference you think it makes.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't invent any of that. This is standard focused conversation method. This is ORID that is well known to the facilitative community. The idea, very simply put, is that if you jump from facts to the interpretations or ideas, then people do not know where each other are coming from. So you see each other as transactional. And if you see each other as transactional partners during a deliberation, that's not really a deliberation. There's really no empathy building. There's really no rapport building if you do not know where those ideas come from. And once you know people's feelings and start resonating or not resonating with it, then the rapport builds over time so that people get into the mood of kind of enjoying hearing about different people's takes, different people's feelings, and so on. Because in the feeling space, that's much more safe. We're not rushing to do a referendum of any sort. There's no referendum on feelings. And also, it makes the new kind of count that Pol.is uses, which is the plurality count, the bridge building count, instead of a majority count, makes much more sense because we're mapping out the potential resonance to a shared fact. And the fact that this fact is shared is then reinforced so that you have 2 immediate obvious benefits. One is that everybody feels that they're not alone. Most of their neighbors actually kind of feel the same way around most facts on the most of the time. So it builds rapport. And then it encourages people to build longer bridges so that across people who feel very differently about the same issue, still it encourages the people that can creatively say, hey, same-sex marriage is a better form of marriage, right? Because if you don't have this division of feeling mapped out, you don't really know where to build that bridge towards. But once it's mapped out, it's very, very easy. But if all you have is ideas, then you don't build bridges between ideas that are like zero sum, like are literally opposing each other. The only thing you can do is to dial the clock, by 30 minutes, and that pleases nobody, right? So not jumping to idea space allows for this high dimensional resonance that is, I think, core of deliberation.
Thank you very much. The mic's gone rogue.
Oh,
It's there. Go for it.
Yeah.
It's in your hand.
Hi, I'm Ellen Lefley from Justice. I work for a human rights and law reform organisation, and we focus on justice system policy. I wanted to know if there's any learning or reflections you have on effective participation with particularly marginalised individuals who traditional participation exercises can be difficult to reach. In our work, it's engaging black individuals who are over-policed in policing policy, or so through being disenfranchised or through trauma. I know we've touched on engaging people who are rural, but I'm interested in people who are difficult to reach because of their experiences. And yeah, if you have any learnings on your methods and particularly accessing those people, yeah.
Yeah. So without going into a lot of details, this is a area that I care very much. I was not just minister in charge of open government and youth engagement, but also of social innovation. And in a lot of social innovation space, the actual people closest to the pain are so caught in the pain and the trauma that even though we know that the actual key to structural change resides in people closest to the pain, their voice are not being uplifted. And so in the kind of language model work that I just referred to, there was an exercise not in Taiwan, but in Michigan called Heal Michigan, where they work with the local outreach groups of returning citizens, of people who were in prison, and have a lot to say about their structural experience. But if you just assemble them into a citizen assembly, it is too much to ask. And so it is more like just narratives, people speaking their experiences and just consenting for those to be kind of on the record. But then a language model sifts through all those lived experiences and find the commonalities that can build a advocate. So it's not a representative in any sense of that word. It's an advocate that represents the relevant time code in their lived experience sharing that adds together to something like an advocate would say to better their structural position. And it's this transcultural translation facility that then allows this to be translated into the communities that do not usually have a lot of patience to hear from returning citizens. And so I think the entire Heal Michigan experiment is worth like expanding on all dimensions. But I would encourage you to read up on it, and maybe we can write some emails and so on. I can introduce you to a lot of people also in Taiwan with indigenous groups, with other groups and so on, with people who have suffered a lot of trauma in their childhood and so on. And there's all very different ways to give voice, to advocate, but not represent these people.
I'm going to attempt two final questions at the front here in the next. Let's run over by 5 minutes if you forgive us. So.
Thank you for the extra time. Hi, Audrey. I am a former senior advisor at the Behavioral Insights team, which maybe you've had conversations with, and I'm now a student at the Oxford Internet Institute. So your discussion of the Pol.is tool...
Speak up a bit, just so colleagues back can hear.
So your discussion of the Pol.is tools led me to wonder how it would work when participants have different understandings of reality. Mm-hmm. So, for example, was the U.S. presidential election stolen or not? Mm-hmm. And in situations where a Pol.is topic depends on a shared understanding of a fact like this one, it can feel a little bit strange to me personally to give bonus weight to ideas that are very different if their differences are extreme and they're matters of falsifiable fact. So I'm just kind of wondering what your perspective on that is.
Yeah. And
Just an easy one.
the science around Pol.is has really progressed since 2015. And so, for example, the Pol.is algorithm is now used in X.com, back when it's still called Twitter. They implemented a version of Pol.is called community nodes. So I'm on the community nodes jury, right? And so people can label each and every context notes to a viral post, sometime from Elon Musk, that leaves out important contextual cues and basically could be read as a little bit post-truth, so to speak. And so to restore that context, they use the same algorithm, that is the bridge building bonus, but they add a lot more dimensions to it. So it's not just about bridging together different clusters, which is still core of that algorithm, but it asks like whether it cites useful sources, whether it is in a constructive tone, whether it shows like curiosity, like intellectual curiosity and things like that, right? So all these, I think, are important, and that is partly why we need to have this kind of curational freedom, because for some people, it is the personal story that carries them into that bridge. So bridges made of that materials are good for those people. For some people, it is high quality, rigorous academic sources or journalistic sources and so on. And so Google Jigsaw did a research and they call them bridge making attributes, so that it analyzed it into like 7 different aspects of potential bridge building. And they did run some experiments that found actually to different audiences, different materials work, but added in total, it doesn't decrease engagement. If you sort by bridge building instead of just by clicks, it actually does not decrease the time people spend on it, these platforms, which means the profit motive is not hurt if they go purpose. But also that people report much better mental health situation if it's sorted by that. And so based on that research, YouTube recently in the US introduced the same Pol.is algorithm, the same bridge building algorithm to the YouTube nodes. So there are pockets of good in those big tech companies that see the value of these algorithms. And I think the next kind of research frontier is to use the multimodal language models to also analyze the nonverbal part from like voice, from prosody, from things like that, and then maybe make sure that we can all sort based on the curational preferences of our communities, of our society, instead of whatever that happens to strike the fancy of the publishing platform. And so I think, yes, the original Pol.is algorithm was one-dimensional, and it was too oversimplified. But in the post-truth kind of situation, we now have like 7 extra higher dimensions that research has shown some of it can also cross that particular bridge.
So John Alexander, I wrote a book called Citizens where I told some of Audrey's story and have a mild responsibility for bringing her here. Just on that, one of the other story in the research for the book that really like triggered me, so Taiwan, what you've done in Taiwan is one. The other was actually looking at a bit of what happens. I went a little way into the QAnon conspiracy theory world, and actually the gateway into that world is you're needed here. Here's your first task. We need you to be a participant in this. And so, from which I take, like, if we don't open up authentic participation, then those who would co-opt humanity in a certain direction will wear the clothes of it. So there's an urgency to it from that perspective. My question though is basically like, if we could put you in the cabinet off room, where would you start? Like, is it the reverse mentoring scheme? Is it pick an issue that's conflicted? Is it where should we start? If the energy in the UK is here.
Yeah, I would start by asking the people, right? That is what I actually did when I first became digital minister. I used a platform called Wiselike, which was really good, but it got folded shortly after I became digital minister. But it was a really good forum in which people can ideate and to ask questions. And many journalists ask me questions, and it only became public when I started answering it. But people can start having a reasonable conversation around that journalistic thread. It's actually informed a lot of the co-facts and the collaborative fact-checking work. Anyway, so I think something like the WISE-like platform, something that would ask the collective intelligence of what has worked and what should we lift up, and some way to summarize it without a lossy compression, something that can actually compress it in the executive summary that is interactive, that can kind of just expand in a kind of fractal-like fashion. And this is not science fiction. One of the governor candidates in Japan recently just used this technology. And you can just hashtag or just call into a hotline or things like that, and his entire kind of governance platform is crowdsourced in this way through language model compression. Of course, Koike won. He didn't won. But I think Governor Koike, who did visit me in Taiwan, was also very interested, and which is why this person actually open sourced this entire process and all the results and so on. And so Governor Koike, if she wants, can then take that and then say, oh, here are the ideas that could have worked and let's give it a try. So some sort of broad listening, I think, is definitely one of the first steps that I would take.
Audrey, thank you. Thank you to the audience for such incredible questions. One of the things I really heard coming through the questions from John there, from online and from the room, and the question that was really at the front of my mind is, how do we make this happen? How do we make it accessible, politically desirable? And there were so many lessons in what you've just spoken about, but the key one that really stood out for me was around those trust figures, you know, that evidence that it could shift the trust kind of feelings in a country, which is seen as kind of one of the biggest challenges for this government for many, many reasons. So that will, you know, you've done us a service in bringing those ideas here and helping us to make the case in this country for these changes as well. But just so grateful for your time and your expertise and your generosity in sharing it with us, and for a brilliant audience taking part. I have to say the concentration on your face was just such a joy to chair tonight. So thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to Audrey.
Thank you.
I nearly forgot a very important job, which is to say that Audrey is going to be tomorrow at New Speak House talking about these things and launching the Plurality London network. And Olivia is in charge of that whole process. So if you're interested in taking part in that tomorrow, if you just haven't had enough and you need more, which I certainly feel like I do, talk to Olivia about the details of that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Go green.